Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us to this webinar today. I would like to welcome on behalf of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. We are based in Hamburg. We are Category 1 Institute of UNESCO, focusing on promoting lifelong learning for all. And I would like to start this welcome with the statement that the webinar will be recorded and it will be shared with the rest of our participants, but also partners. If you do not mind, please take into account that all the speakers will be recorded, and the webinar will be shared after today. Thank you so much. And for the introduction of this webinar, my name is Rahat Joldushaliyeva. I am team leader of the Institute's program on building quality learning ecosystems. And the webinar today, we are co-organizing it with a wonderful group of scholars from around the world who are joining us from North America, Europe, Australia. We don't probably have it today. From Asia as well as Asia Pacific and Africa and Latin America, of course. The concept of pluriversal literacy, what is it and why it is important for us to highlight and consider in our education, as well as in promoting the idea for sustainable and inclusive future for all. This will be the topic today. We'll be unpacking together with a group of scholars and researchers and responding some of the questions, but also sharing some of the insights in implementing this idea in practice, whether it is in teaching as well as in research. And thank you so much for the speakers today who were able to join us to the webinar. Without further ado, I would like to request my colleague Annapurna to share some tips for housekeeping information, which will be important for us. Please, those participants who would like to change your names in your, please do so now, and please indicate your country where you are participating as well. And for those who would like to have questions raised to the speakers, please use the question and answer chat box here, and we'll be able to raise some of these questions here to the speakers on the floor, but most of it can be also responded in writing by the speakers to you individually. Please use chat box only for the issues on logistics, but the question and answers box will be used for questions to the speakers and moderators of this webinar. Without further ado, I would like to invite the moderator of opening session, Mrs. Jennifer Rossell, University of Sheffield, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. She will be introducing the speaker of this session, Ms. Mia Perry from University of Glasgow. And without further ado, I would like to invite Jennifer to take over the moderation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahat. It's such a pleasure to be here today. And I will speak very briefly about pluriversal literacies. It's very much Professor Mia Perry's baby, developing it. I've been able to have the benefit of being around all week to some of the seminars this week that Mia's planned with her team and Sustainable Futures team, and it's been interesting and powerful, as it always is with Mia. So pluriversal literacies is a concept that comes from a decolonial perspective that disrupts Northern assumptions of the universal. And you'll hear about this in the panel. And we're a group of scholars that Mia's brought together when we met last October, and we talked about from varying perspectives what that means to us. And that will be borne out in the panels based on questions, framed around questions. So during the webinar, there'll be discussions about the challenge of a dominant focus on print reading, for example, as one of the only legitimate forms of literacy. There'll also be varying perspectives about the notion of decolonialism and what that means around the world in the global South and the global North. And we thought that questions would be a good way of entering this dialogue. And please, we encourage you to share your own stories, ask questions, and make this dialogic. The three questions that frame the presentations are: what are plural literacies and why are they important? What does it mean to teach research through pluriversals? And what do futures look like through a pluriversal's perspective? And how can you apply a pluriversal approach to your life and to learning? Which I think, many of you in the audience will be able to share your own insights about that. So our hope in this webinar and objectives is to share insights and comparative analysis into research, policy, and practice that exemplifies a sense of pluriversal literacies and what that means. Share the knowledge and experiences of pluriversal literacies at work and ways forward to materialize it across contexts and through our effective senses, and to discuss the policy implications for pluriversal literacies. So those are sort of the main hope for objectives and aims. But of course, I defer to Professor Perry on framing the topic for us and kind of launching the different questions that we will attend to. Mia?
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, UNESCO, for your partnership in this initiative. I'm going to share my screen and begin a few slides to help us through. So yes, I'm Mia, based at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, but I co-direct the Sustainable Futures Global Network. And it's through that network of colleagues and collaboration over the past 6 or 7 years that my scholarship as a literacies and arts educator has been evolved and transformed into something that's much more responsive, I think, to the needs of education in the world today. And to enable the radical change that's needed in literacies education today, it's necessary in this wide audience to begin with some fundamentals that might give us a common ground to get started. And I think only with common ground and some sort of fundamentals can we really realize how much opportunity there is for positive change, and also how the many unhelpful assumptions we've become used to become realized, the assumptions that we've forgotten perhaps to question in our work. So I begin with this statement, that we grow, that we learn, that we act in relation to the world and to those around us. This is not my claim, this is a common claim that's helped many of us understand what we do and why we do it in the world of education and sustainability. But if we agree there, we must recognize that we relate through sensing, through reading, and through making meaning. And this is where literacies becomes essential. We have the capacity to sense, to read, and to communicate only within the limitations or the affordances of the literacies that we have. So these are glimpses of some of the many science systems that we can relate to in this page, many of the science systems that we need to learn from, that we need to read, but we can only do so if we have the literacies to do so. And so for some of you, you'll see an ability to read some of these images more than others. So, so I wonder what literacy and reading does to work towards sustainability. And despite this plural need that we have of literacies, reading and writing print has been deemed of universal priority. So literacy education, as in terms of reading and writing, has been deemed the most important thing to all peoples in all places. And without this type of literacy, furthermore, you are counted as illiterate. And so these are very, very brief glimpses, and some of my friends in the audience will recognize these pictures that have caused me to ask myself, what is reading and writing doing for some of these people? And many of the speakers in this panel this morning will add layers and many more clear examples, but as a brief indication and introduction to what you're about to hear, we argue that we need to know more than read and write print. And we also ask, well, we also believe in the role of education to do that. And we ask, what if education didn't only teach one universal way to relate to the world? What might it look like if education supported us in the relational work that we need to be whole, flourishing, sustainable peoples in relation to a world? So we need another framework to do that. And the pluriverse is the alternative framework that we use, alternative to the universal. The universal, of course, is defined by a small number of people from a certain set of perspectives. In the pluriverse, there are many universals. And again, the pluriverse isn't a framework that we have coined. It comes from a long geopolitical history in itself and has been taken up progressively in sociology and economics all over the world. I argue, along with my colleagues and many others, that the current universal literacy that is print prevailing, reading and writing, school literacy, is insufficient and it's inequitable. And it's hard to be brief in these terms, but I will remain brief and allow my colleagues to flesh out the reasons and the underpinning notions behind this. We believe that there is a possibility and a potential for sustainable futures in education if reading and writing can be put in relation to other literacies of relating to the world. For example, literacies of water, of soil, of land, of faith, of spirituality, of literacies of the body, material literacies, the day-to-day sensory meaning-making practices that are different in every context, but equally important and critical to the equitable and sustainable learning and futures of our learners. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mia. Okay, so we've attended to the first question about what are pluriversal literacies, why are they important? At this point, I don't know whether people have any clarifying questions. There are, as Rahat said, there's the question and answer area, and then there's the chat. And if you could put it in the question and answer area, it's easier for us. Or you can save those questions as we go along. Okay. Seeing none, I'm just very aware that we want to have these amazing speakers. So session one looks at the question or attends to the question, what does it mean to teach and research through pluriversal literacies? For the first two speakers, they're going to speak together. And you have a wonderful scholar from Colombia, Dr. Nancy Palacios Minna, and she's an associate professor at Universidad de los Andes. And she'll be speaking with Dr. Marcela Ramos, who is a research fellow at the Sustainability and Interdisciplinary Research theme in the College of Social Sciences at the University of Glasgow. And their rich and wonderful biography should be in the chat, or will be in the chat. And if I turn to them, Nancy and Marcela, and they'll be speaking in Spanish.
Thank you, Jennifer. Could anyone help me with the slides, please?
Yes, of course. I will share the presentation. Or Marcela, will you do it?
Yeah. Yes, but can you share it?
Thank you, Marcela.
So Anna, if you can share, will be good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Marcela Ramos. I am a research fellow at the Sustainability IT in the College of Social Sciences. And as Jennifer explained, today with Nancy Palacios, we will share our research and our work in English and Spanish. So hopefully our multilingual audience will get a sense of our work in the area of new literacies. Over to you, Nancy.
Hello, thank you for your invitation. I am Nancy Palacios. I am a teacher in Andes University in Bogotá, en Colombia. Yo soy Nancy Palacios Mena. Soy profesora de la Facultad de Educación de la Universidad de los Andes en Bogotá. Y voy a estar aquí con ustedes haciendo parte de la presentación con Marcela en español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Nancy. So this is a very short presentation, so I will start by introducing the basics. What are we contending? Why is this important from an educational perspective? And then Nancy will expand in Spanish on the methodologies for memory reconstruction in Colombia and how this is connected with plural ways of knowing, learning, and bonding. We will try to make key connections with the reflections coming from Mia and our practical experiences in Colombia. So let's move to the slide, please, the slide 2. Yeah. So following some of the ideas highlighted by Mia, when we think about pluriversal literacies, we contend that it is essential to acknowledge, value, recognize that there are plural ways of knowing, making sense, connect, and this plurality has the potential to enrich our relationship with the world around us, our history, the way we teach, and the way we research. Next slide, please. So why this is pluriverse approach relevant? Because it provides an opportunity to recognize different literacies, and while challenging knowledge hierarchies, this will allow us to engage and serve diverse populations and aspects of the social world, such as how we learn and make sense of our recent history, the history of conflict in Colombia, for instance, which is now will addressed by Nancy. Over to you, Nancy. Next slide.
Gracias, Marcela. Nosotros queremos entonces comentar un caso específico colombiano. En este caso, lo que queremos es compartir con ustedes cómo las literalidades pluriversas dialogan, están en relación con las metodologías que se están utilizando para reconstrucción de la memoria en Colombia. Queremos destacar en primer lugar que estas metodologías de reconstrucción de la memoria son nuevas formas de trabajar con la comunidad para recordar episodios que hicieron parte del conflicto armado colombiano. Con estas nuevas metodologías de reconstrucción de la memoria se están incorporando las voces de personas que han sido excluidas, que no han sido usualmente escuchadas en los conflictos y cuyas voces han sido reprimidas. Personas que podemos considerar no seleccionadas o no importantes en los currículos, en los libros de textos, en los monumentos, porque en los monumentos se ha, en este tipo de construcción se ha dado principalmente importancia a las voces de otras personas. Cuando abordamos la reconstrucción de la memoria desde este enfoque, lo que hacemos es recordar y utilizar herramientas que tienen que ver con el cuerpo, con los conocimientos de las comunidades y con la emocionalidad para, como les digo, hacer reconstrucción de memoria histórica en este caso. Uno de los principales objetivos es no revictimizar a las víctimas, es decir, que las personas que han vivido episodios de violencia y que han sido víctimas del conflicto pasen por un proceso de empoderamiento y no de revictimización. Otra cosa importante es dignificar la memoria, es dar paso a la potencia del ser humano, a la agencia de las comunidades, porque esto hace parte del gran pilar del acuerdo de paz en Colombia, que es la no repetición del conflicto hacia adelante. Por favor, please, the news slides.
No, I'm going to make a summary of what you have said, Nancy. Sorry.
No, Marcela.
Yes. So what Nancy highlighted is some critical aspect of the Colombian conflict context and the relevance of the methodology for memory reconstruction within this context. Regarding the connection between these methodologies and the pluriversal literacies, Nancy makes the case about how memory is approached, the value of dignity when we talk about memory and we talk about victims, and how victims, after going through an exercise with their bodies and the memory, move to a feeling of survival, an emotion that could be less painful, reconstructive, and important when you think about the conflict. And also another point highlighted is the idea of included other voices. The reflection comes from different voices from different voices and the diversity of the population. Over to you, Nancy.
Gracias, Marcela. En esta diapositiva, ustedes ven un mapa de Colombia. Ven en este mapa de Colombia 2 departamentos, 2 regiones. El departamento de Bolívar, muy conocida porque aquí está nuestra Cartagena de Indias, y Antioquia. En estos 2 departamentos han emergido 2 grupos de mujeres tejedoras y bordadoras. Estas mujeres han sido parte de los ejercicios de reconstrucción de memoria histórica del Centro de Construcción de Memoria Histórica que se creó en Colombia hace un par de años. Lo que vemos en la pantalla son algunos ejercicios que ellas han hecho de bordado y de tejido para esta reconstrucción de memoria. ¿Qué nos permiten estos ejercicios? Visibilizar la forma como los materiales, en este caso el tejido, el bordado, el cuerpo, la elaboración manual, han aportado a la construcción de sentido del sobrevivir a las víctimas. Y esto es importante porque nos permite gestionar lo emocional en torno a eventos que han sido violentos para las mujeres. Tenemos, por ejemplo, en la pantalla unas muñecas que se han realizado como una manera de volver la presencia y de tener presente a aquellos que fueron desaparecidos o aquellos que murieron en episodios de violencia. Al frente tenemos un árbol de la vida, luego tenemos un tejido que es una construcción de la comunidad, y acá les queríamos compartir una foto donde están varias mujeres haciendo este ejercicio de reconstrucción de la memoria. Para cerrar, ¿por qué es importante, digamos, estos ejercicios? Lo que nos muestran esta manera de reconstruir la memoria son nuevas construcciones de significado, la construcción colectiva, y eso es muy importante porque se le ha dado sentido nuevamente a la visión de comunidad que en muchos momentos se desarticuló por la guerra porque las comunidades tuvieron que salir de sus territorios, pero además tenemos un significado de las personas que fueron víctimas, quienes pasan de ser considerados como víctimas y ellos mismos a partir de esos ejercicios de memoria pasan a considerarse como sobrevivientes. Tenemos entonces unos ejercicios de tejido y bordado que nos han ayudado a una reconfiguración de los sobrevivientes y a un sanar el dolor, a un darle nuevo sentido a la vida y a un empoderamiento y potencia de las comunidades. Muchas gracias.
So here we are showing a map in Colombia and basically 2 departments. And Nancy talked and shared the experience of 2 communities, 2 women's group who has worked through these new methodologies and exercise and developed and worked using fabrics and embroidery to rework their experience with the conflict. Basically, due to familial loss or in violent circumstances, displacement, another manifestation of the conflict, they re-experience that and rework that through these fabrics and embroidery. This exercise gave a new meaning to life as a survivors, and the associate knitting and embroidery with the healing of pain. So in this way, communities, collective reflections, collective readings, and exercise about memory allow this community to rework and rediscuss, reconnect with their past and build this new future. So we can expand on this in the chat, but it's basically I try to summarize the main ideas. Thank you again for attending this presentation. I hope the bilingual space worked for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nancy and Marcella. And I have to note that I think it's exceptional how many different countries we have in the audience, and very special to hear from Colombia. So thank you so much, and have the Spanish and English. So now we're going to move to a very old dear friend of mine. She's not old, but a dear friend of mine, Diane Collier, Dr. Diane Collier at Brock University. And she's going to attend to the same question. What does it mean to teach and research through pluriversal literacies? As we transition to slides, I know there's a question in the Q&A, and I'm going to tend to that after Diane speaks.
My slideshow is sharing there now. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm Diane Collier from Brock University, and I'm in the Niagara region of Ontario in the eastern part of Canada. And I just want to thank you also to Nancy and Marcella for a lovely presentation, and I'm so pleased to be here. My research is focused on multimodal, critical, and digital literacies. And my primary research collaborator at the moment in the projects I'll show you today is Melissa McKinney-Lepp, a teacher, pictured in the bottom right. We are thinking about what it means to teach and research through visual and photographic literacies. However, we are looking way beyond the visual to other forms of sense-making and meaning-making, both print-based and beyond, that are both accessible and relevant to the children that we're working with in classrooms. We believe that how children interpret and create photographic images in their everyday lives is essential to understanding what it means to be critically engaged and literate citizens today. So the examples and the images that I'll show to you are from working with children in Melissa's school, mostly children in 2nd and 3rd grade, so that's 7 and 8 years old, and some other children in the school also. And so you can see some pictures of them working on various projects. The community is located on the outskirts of a popular tourist destination, as you can see in the image here. Many students speak multiple languages, and some have been in Canada for quite a short period of time. Families may require assistance from the school with needs such as food and clothing. A little bit about Canada. It has a reputation as a multicultural mosaic that welcomes immigrants, although this history really has been fraught with challenges and barriers for many newcomers. Canada is also perceived as a relatively wealthy country that is culturally diverse, with widespread access to digital resources and globally connected to distant others. So these are some of the things we're thinking about. But at the same time, in Canadian classrooms, literacy is assessed using international tests such as PISA, standardized provincial assessments, curriculum documents that subscribe to a unitary and hierarchical standard of literacy, and particularly focused on reading and writing, as my colleagues have also mentioned. Indigenous practices and languages and the many linguistic and cultural practices that immigrants to Canada use, as well as the pervasive and ubiquitous everyday social and digital literacy practices that most Canadians engage in, are not considered in the literacy curriculum in classroom spaces. So focusing on visual literacies and the power of and practices surrounding the circulation of images in Canadian lives, that's one path into thinking more deeply about how literacies are enacted. And that's what we're looking at. So in the first set of images here, you can see a local photographer working with children to teach photographic skills and also conceptual processes. In the images on the left, children were superimposing images of themselves on imagined possible photographic backgrounds and exploring future and often possible versions of themselves in other contexts. In the bottom right, special family photos were reconfigured and then shared with the school community. Students were deeply engaged in these processes, and the tasks and expectations were possible for everyone. In the second set of photographic images, and these are photographs that have been modified in some way, we can see how the products of children's photo making unfold over time. So we have been examining how cultural and family practices can be shared and how understanding across difference can be developed in this really demographically changing community. In the top right, you see a girl zooms in on her hand entwined with her mother's under a set of deer antlers on top of camouflaged clothing, emphasizing the family's love of hunting, but also the roles of women and girls in this practice. In the bottom right, a boy, after many iterations and much advice from his peers, has created a simple but powerful image of the Quran and the power and light it brings to him. In the bottom left, another girl who got up early in the morning to take this picture, so the light was perfect, shows her affection for family summer trips in their trailer. It's a little hard to discern this particular picture, but I wanted to show her final version that's layered with advice and words from her friends in her class. So some of the words are adventures, tradition, had many years with this. Enzi had many years with this, love and family time. And then in the top left, another girl collages her many versions of her photo of her hijab and the facets of her relationship to this important artifact. This slide shows just a sampling of the other kinds of photographic and literacy processes with which the children have engaged. In the top left, children were learning to make objects look important, and hands became an important theme that spread between them. In the top right, you can see how children use photographs as a starting place for their ideas, working in other modalities such as drawing, using languages other than English, and through printed words here. In the bottom right, you can see how children became artful and careful in the way that they represented here a rock. So we're really trying to be a counter to the kind of quick taking and sharing of images that happens. And also they engaged in more conventional yet still collaborative writing processes. So you see a short poem on the bottom left. So in this research, children have been thinking about how photographs are framed, modified, and shared. They've been thinking about the roles of audiences in photo making and sharing, most importantly, I think. And their work with their classroom teacher has been a journey of empathy and community building. They're connecting with children in other contexts in the region and sharing in online spaces, as you can see in the school sharing here, in the website they developed in the middle there, and on the right in the tweets that were shared about their work. They're learning how to counteract the swiftly taken and shared digital images with thoughtful, artful, compassionate images. So visual literacies here take us beyond a unitary literacy to a framing of literacies. And so in this case, we show how children read or interpret and write or make photographs about important things in their everyday lives. And we hope that research and teaching practices like this can lead to the development of critical literacy pedagogies that expand current discourses and practices of English-only, print-focused literacy in formal learning contexts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. So we have one question. I encourage everybody to add a question or a comment, and it can be the panelists, it can be the audience, into the question and answer area. So it's Mr. Dustin who asks, Husseini, who asks, how important is it, now this is for Marcella, for Nancy, for Diane, how important is it to be aware of decoloniality with respect to pluriversal literacies? How do we ensure academics, students, and other colleagues understand the differences between the post-colonial and decolonial with respect to the pluriverse, and how these complement one another with respect to creating an understanding of what pluriversality is? So well crafted. I'm sure Mia will have thoughts as well, but I leave it with the speakers. Who would like to? And please, Nancy, by all means, speak in Spanish.
You're muted, Marcella.
You okay, Marcella? And thank you very much, Mar, for your question.
Yes, I was reading also Mark. Thank you, Mark, again. So I think I will start the answer. I am not just the one who gives the answer, but it's basically, I would say that these pluriversal literacies gave us awareness about hierarchies of knowledge, basically. I mean, who are literate? That is the question we try to make and we try to answer. And there is no one answer to that question. And that, for instance, in the case of this exercise of memory, you can think about your memory through text, through reflections about history in these books, but also what Nancy and I are working on is other type of exercise that help us to rethink and help a group of women to reflect about their own experience. about their body and the memory, and bringing to the conversation other reflections, experiences about the conflict, about what happened in their history and in their country, and create new connections and reflections about this conflict. So I would say the main, or one of the main ideas, has to do with new hierarchies, new ways of get access to knowledge and reflect about what has happened in the history, for instance. That would be my point to start the answer. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, if Nancy, Diane, you want to add, I would defer to you, but otherwise I'll add a little.
Okay. Nancy or Diane, do you want to add to this? If not, we can move on to the next. We have 3 questions, so that's, and I do want to watch the time.
I think if Mia wants to jump in here with this particular question.
Okay. Very briefly, I think that absolutely this has everything to do with decoloniality. If that's a framework that resonates with you in your place in the world, and it doesn't all over the world. But it is inextricable from that notion, because a universal idea of literacy as it manifests currently throughout the world is hugely, you cannot disentangle that from the colonial project, from this notion of an old-fashioned notion of development, that there are certain communication practices that are needed and beneficial to other people outside of, let's say, for example, a European, a Western context. And the idea that there is a certain categorization of people that are literate versus illiterate in terms of making meaning with the world. These things are hugely arising from the colonial project. So they are very much entangled. And therefore it is really about equity, and it's about social and ecological justice and sustainability. To have a pluriversal literacies education is an anti-colonial project. It's a project about plurality and difference across a globe.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a longer question from Mar Sanchez. I'm going to skip over the Spanish if that's okay, but it's because I can't speak Spanish. The research that you do is on bookmaking practices with children in Mexico and Colombia. So this embodied and relational altruistic practice, I believe, has a lot in common with the memory reconstruction work you spoke about, Nancy. So these projects are a response, very complex and often violent contexts. Can you speak to the relevance, Nancy, of small-scale projects within the larger globalized world? I sometimes struggle when arguing for the importance of projects with localized impact. Gracias. And Marcella.
Yeah, maybe I will briefly introduce and then you can. Nancy, Mar nos habla en español y en inglés y nos dice cómo este trabajo que se está haciendo sobre los ejercicios de la memoria, que en general son experiencias locales, ¿cómo podemos transformarla también como en experiencias globales o entenderlas o transmitirlas como experiencias globales? En general parecen casos aislados, pero ¿qué importancia tienen o cómo reflexionamos sobre esa importancia más global? Eso es lo que plantea Mar Sánchez.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. La experiencia que tenemos en Colombia es que cuando tú empiezas por experiencias locales, los aprendizajes que se van construyendo en cada una se van ampliando y nos van ayudando a aprender cómo orientar esos ejercicios y hacerlos en otros lugares. Por ejemplo, en Colombia empezaron en algunos lugares con algunas experiencias de tejido y bordado, de sanación para niños, para mujeres, para ancianos, y lo que hemos ido viendo es que esas experiencias se han ido contextualizando, se adaptan a las necesidades de cada comunidad, pero con esas adaptaciones se van extendiendo a otros lugares. Entonces, ¿qué pensamos? Estas experiencias que estamos construyendo en Colombia nos están dando señas, nos están dando indicadores de cómo podemos hacer sanación, hacer reconstrucción emocional de comunidades en otros lugares del mundo que también están siendo en este momento afectados por violencia. Por ejemplo, Siria, Ucrania, que en unos años estarán haciendo estos ejercicios de memoria que estamos haciendo hoy en Colombia. Gracias.
Oh, gracias, Nancy. I am aware of time now. So what I'm going to ask is if the panelists, Nancy, Marcella, and Diane, can type in answers to their thoughts on the questions in the Q&A. And if that works for everybody, just because it's time's going, I'm going to move to Rahat, our wonderful host.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentations of from the speakers from Latin America as well as Canada from that part of the world. We move to the session 2, in which we are going to unpack the questions, what do futures look like through a pluriversal perspective? How can you apply a pluriversal approach to life and learning? And for this session, we have 4 speakers. I would like to invite the speakers, Dr. Sharifa Abdullah from University of Malawi, Dr. Carmen Medina from University of Indiana University in the US, but also Puerto Rico, and Dr. Lisa Bradley and Miss Jehan McLeod from Scotland, from University of Glasgow, but also from the NGO there. And we'll be unpacking again. I would like to repeat the questions. What do futures look like through a pluriversal perspective, and how can we apply such an approach to life and learning? It's not just about the work, but it's also about life in general. Yeah. May I request now Ms. Sharifa Abdullah, Dr. Abdullah, over to you. You have 6 to 7 minutes to unpack, to respond to these questions.
I think Sharifa is going to go last. I think we'll start with
Okay, sorry. Then I would like to invite Dr. Carmen Medina. Maybe it's over to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi,
here.
everyone.
Yep.
Yes, I'm here. Wait, I'm just typing something here. Okay. Someone will upload the slides for me.
Yes, I will show your presentation. 1 second, please.
Okay.
And while we're waiting for the presentation slides, maybe we can start responding to questions in the question and answer box, the previous speakers of the session 1. Thank you. Anna, if you can share the slide. Presentation
Is it okay
mode.
to get started?
Yeah,
yes.
thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, buenos días y buenas tardes. Me llamo Carmen Medina y soy nacida y criada en Puerto Rico. I grew up and was educated in Puerto Rico up to my college days in my alma mater, the University of Puerto Rico. My presentation will have bits of English and bits of Spanish, so hang there. Before I begin with my presentation, I would like to thank Mia and the Sustainable Futures Global Network for the vision and support in developing the Pluriversal Literacies Global Collective. Also to Rahat from UNESCO for being such a fundamental part and mediator in our sense-making process with this project. Finally, to all the members of this collectiva for their hard work and solidarities, articulating what a more equitable literacy future might look like. Today, I would like to present and share some insights on Pluriversal Literacies projects I've been working in for over 13 years in Puerto Rico. This recently, we have begun to call our work El Semillero de Literacidades Insumisas, the seedbed of unsubmissive literacies. This has been a collaborative project between literacy faculty at the University of Puerto Rico and myself at Indiana University, where I teach. Overall, on this participatory project, we work towards the reaffirmation of local literacies at the same time We, as Puerto Ricans, educators, and citizens, craft a new relationship to reposition our understandings of who we are as part of the global South, or what we better define as the majority world, and more specifically within the Caribbean and Latin American ways of knowing. May I have the next slide, please? The significance of this project, and I think this goes to the question on coloniality and anti-colonial perspectives and pluriversal literacies. The significance of these projects and the tactical and intentional move to look at ourselves as Puerto Ricans, educators, and citizens in a different relational space is highly related to the history of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is one of the few contemporary nations that lives under a colonial regime. Although in 1960, the United Nations declared coloniality a crime against humanity, Puerto Rico still lives under such conditions in relation to the United States. Many of you probably became aware of this as you learned through media in 2017 of the major environmental and humanitarian catastrophe caused by Hurricane Maria and the lack of response from US stakeholders. It is at this time that the world realized how Puerto Ricans, although US citizens, live under threatening conditions related to our land, economy, health, culture, language, among others. Next slide, please. It is within this social background that the Proyecto El Semillero emerges. When thinking of new social sustainable futures and the role of pluriversal literacies, in El Semillero, we feed from grassroots activist communities under the belief that vendrán tiempos mejores, los estamos construyendo. We will have better times and we're building those. And that quote comes from La Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, which is one of the grassroots activist feminist groups in Puerto Rico who is moving and shaking, and from where we fit many of the initiatives that we frame the initiative that we work in our project. Let's just see. Next slide, please. In El Semillero de Literacies Insumisas, we're mostly educators in the formal and informal way who engage with and learn with and investigate forms of pluriversal literacies that are anti-colonial, anti-racist, queer, and centered in sustainable reclamation. Next slide. We work with teacher candidates and teachers exploring emerging pluriversal literacy spaces that foreground playfulness, critical joy, and new solidarities. Here, I will quickly provide three examples that demonstrate pluriversality in our engagement with literacies and social and critical practices. Next slide. Okay, can we go one more? I'm sorry, I skipped one. Thank you. A fundamental aspect in understanding other ways of meaning making in engagement with other kinds of texts is part of our project. So in this sense, you're gonna notice that we are working with text. We are working, one big element of our project is the reposition of what kind of text and where the text that we are reading in classrooms and in, as you can see in the pictures, in community centers and other spaces. We are shifting from the canon into other ways of using and reading literature. So the role of social justice picture books from Latin America and the Caribbean has been a fundamental aspect of this project. Stories and storying that help us see ourselves and develop other solidarities have become an integral part of how we make meaning of our core social reality as relational to other countries outside of the Anglo-USA and Anglo-European traditions. So we're mostly educated, and I don't know if you know Adishi's famous TED Talk, the danger of a single story. So as Puerto Ricans, we have lived the same experiences and trajectory of other colonial countries. In the case of Adishi, Nigeria, so what I read as a child was mostly imported as a one-size-fits-all curriculum from the United States. So a big piece of this project is to go out and to work in communities and to work with teachers in understanding what does it mean to look at our social issues from the perspective of the struggles in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next slide, please. In El Semillero, bodies matter, and bodies matter as interpreters of meaning, but also as embodied vessels and producers of stories. Bodies as a tool and a text has remained at the margins of classrooms and learning. If you look at the set of images presented here, when you look at the first images on the top left, this happened very recently, like a couple of weeks ago. This is a making music experience where we experiment with the connections between African childhood folklore across Ghana and Puerto Rico, and from there, Puerto Rico and Latin America. Just as the community images on the right, in our work with teachers, we are able to make with literacies in relation to transnational connections that tend to be hidden and remain in the margins of what constitute as knowledges in Puerto Rico, particularly from our Afro-descendant roots. Next one. The Literacies of the Water initiative is a new layer of our work. What is our relationship with waters in Puerto Rico? What knowledges do we as agentic community knowers have to honor, relate, but also to survive our everyday relationship with water? How do we reclaim and foreground what we do know about water? In other ways, what we are calling literacy, how are literacies of the water produced? We're aiming in El Semillero for a paradigmatic shift to better understand the ways people in their local communities learn in everyday problem-solving situations for sustainable survival. A participatory inquiry approach frames the study of how local knowledges and challenges could be supported and expanded as innovative curriculum design that makes visible and accessible the role of local knowledges in sustainability literacies and sustainability education. So this is a project this is our new project. We're super excited about it. And the idea is, instead of thinking like, let's say, in science, and I get a lot of requests of things like that, can we go to Puerto Rico and teach people about water sustainability? And I'm like, no, can we talk to people about what they know that we could learn? So, so we are shifting the paradigm and very much aligned with the ideas that have been developed around storing and multimodalities, embodiment, and emotions. We're going to work from that perspective and from the community perspective and developing the stories of our relationship with water. So, in conclusion, as we work in El Semillero, our experiences making with literacies are highly diverse or pluriversal. And as you can see, we look at this from many different, not just from one perspective, but from multiple. We are concerned with a holistic view in teacher preparation and other spaces that disrupt canons of what constitutes to read and write in the world. As Dr. Perry mentioned in her opening presentation, the needs and demands of what we do with literacy have changed. The unique reality of what we do with literacies and how literacies are understood in the Caribbean archipelagos such as Puerto Rico have changed. The models imported from the global north have done very little to solve the fundamental problems we encounter every day. Actually, imported models of literacy have been the cause of many of our problems. Through this work, it is our hope to be part of the construction of better ways of living, participating, and doing as sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carmen Medina, for a wonderful presentation around pluriversality and how you research and apply also in your practice, whether it is in teaching, but also research and working with the communities and looking at different kind of angles of literacy and what it means to do it in practice as well. Now, I would like to invite two speakers, Lisa Bradley and Jehan McLeod. If I may ask maybe Lisa to go first and maybe Jehan, I don't remember the order. Please go ahead, and while we wait, maybe you have also presentation slides which my colleagues can share as well.
Thank you, Rakat. Yes, Jehan and I will be speaking together, and I see the slides on screen now, which is great. Thank you, Carmen, for that. Thank you, everybody who has spoken so far. It is a It is a very exciting thing to be in this space and to have this moment with you all at UNESCO as well. If we can move to the first slide, please. Jahan and I are delighted to continue this discussion of pluriversal literacies and futures. And we're going to do so by looking specifically at material literacy and how making affords us different ways of knowing and being in the world, as well as writing the future in the present moment. And to do this, we'll soon travel to Scotland, a place where links between material literacies and more sustainable ways of knowing and being are exemplified through the work of Galgale, where Jahan works and really leads the charge. But I want to start our journey in Washington, DC, where I am sitting right now, having just spent a week visiting an exhibition on craft and making at the Renwick Gallery. Next slide, please. The exhibition is entitled This Present Moment. You'll see a little QR code on screen there. Please feel free to follow that and explore as I chat. The exhibition brings together over 200 artworks from a diversity of traditional, Indigenous and contemporary craft artists from all over the United States. And it asks us to consider, what can Indigenous craft and practices of making teach us about making more sustainable and just futures? And what is really striking about the works on display at the Renwick, be it woodwork, quilting, ceramics, glass blowing, is that craft work is always relational. The skills, the knowledges, the literacies are passed from those who have honed them. The new makers adapt them in relation with their communities, the materials of the time, the needs of the day. This way of working, this literacy is not fixed, but it demands an adaptability to the present moment. Someone who is literate in this way can read the available materials, tools, and skills. They work in dialogue with the world. They have a sense of what needs making. They work in collaboration, working and making communities as they go. This is a literacy that we desperately need when faced with the existential threat of climate change, where nothing is static, where nothing can be taken for granted. We need literacies that afford us adaptive ways of reading and writing the world through making. And one final thing that I think is really striking about this exhibition, and what this piece by Alicia Eggers prompts us to realise, is how this act of making the present is also a means of making the future. Making and material literacies simultaneously demand us to learn from the past, working with what's available in the present, all the while experiencing that as we touch materials on Earth, we are constructing the future before our very eyes. If you could move to the next slide, please. And core to this way of being in the world is really a different orientation of time, a time which is far more embedded in Indigenous knowledges and practices. And this time really prompts an awareness of our responsibilities as future ancestors, be this through Indigenous principles of 7th-generation thinking, or as the quote adapted on Alicia Eggers' work from Stuart Brand's Clock of the Long Now shows, inhabiting the world that the future is always present. It demands that our frame of reference must not be tomorrow, it can't be next week or next year, but we must live in the knowledge that the future is present and that the clocks that we need are those of 1,000 years in length and more, so that we commit to this principle of future ancestry. Material literacies, therefore, are not simply skills to be acquired, but they are radically different ways of living with the world, with others, with ourselves, and with the future. And I'm delighted to pass on to Jahan to see how this work, this way of being in the world, is really brought to life and exemplified in the work of Gal Gale in Scotland.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm really pleased to be here sharing some of our story, and our story starts in the mid-90s in a disadvantaged area in the south side of Glasgow called Pollock, against the sort of large-scale multi-million-pound motorway campaign throughout the UK. And I think that there's something important to the theme of pluriversal literacies that space inhabits for me, and it goes back to unmediated spaces that are unmediated by the normal tools and ways in which we indicate status, and very much in an area where we had both people from an area where there are probably high rates of literacy associated with poverty and disadvantage, but also academics from around the world who were coming to study what was happening in the environmental protest movement at that point in time. And I think it's something about the unmediated nature of the space that forced us both to be in relationship with one another in a very profound way, that a way I think that we are often cut off from in the West, or in a place like Glasgow, that mean that you must find ways to resolve very basic issues like connected to our immediate survival of getting through the night, whether that might be related to the -10 degrees temperature that we experienced one winter, or the high levels of violence that were experienced in that area at the time. And I think so for me, around how we develop pluriversal literacies that help us read the future, the realm of the imaginary, it really needs to come into that. That was kind of given, that was articulated by us declaring ourselves independent from the UK in May 1994. Nearly 30 years ago. We launched our own passports, our own stamps, and I think that opened up spaces that we hadn't thought were that we hadn't imagined were possible before. But I also wanted to mention there's something that's come up in other presentations around the significance of embodied experiences, how we understand things in our bodies, not just intellectually or not just through reading and writing. And for me, a beautiful story that really exemplifies that is I was contacted by a 5-year-old through Twitter. I was contacted through Twitter by somebody who was 5 at the time of Pollock Free State, and the affected him so deeply that he's now a student on Lisa's class, doing a master's in community development. That wasn't an intellectual experience he had, that was an embodied experience, or for me, that he was 5 is fairly demonstrative of that. And then moving into Gal Gale, the organisation we set up to work with the things that we'd learned through that experience, I think Lisa's really captured strongly already. Just seeing the ways in which inhabiting the modes that are given to us as mainly consumers, but even the ways in which we produce was really demeaning for people, and that through the craft process, people are able to find meaning, to make relationship, to be in relationship in the world that also contributes to their making of self. And that there is a lot of unlearning that needs to take place in order for us to do that. If we move to the next slide, I'm conscious of the time. I think both Mia and Carmen have mentioned literacy of water, and one of the things that we turn our craft skills towards is making and using boats. And there are, again, beautiful stories of sailors who used to be able to read the water to help navigate ships. which would have been an essential skill in surviving on the west coast of Scotland. If you were taking out fishing boats and you were dependent on those boats coming back to bring fish to the community, skills that are being lost as people die out because we're not appreciating their value. And I'm aware of the time, so I'll move to the next slide. And I think that in some ways takes us into for COP26. We declared the territories around Gale's workshop in the south side of Glasgow an independent state, partly to reference the lack of change since the declaration of the Pollock Free State. But also, I think, to sort of step into that imaginary realm again, to question the legitimacy of some of the technocratic solutionism to some of the enduring predicaments that we find ourselves in. And I think profoundly, for me, it is about troubling all of these concepts that we're bound by, including the concept of sustainability and the way that can often show up with development and all of the ways in which that has become part of a colonial project, and to really ground it in conversations about our collective survival. And I think that it's our survival and the skills and the competencies and the literacies that will ensure our collective survival in a way that isn't just brutal, but has beauty and meaning in it, and dignity that I think is essential to understand if we are to make just futures. And I'm conscious of the time, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, both Lisa and Jehan, for this inspiring, actually, perspectives to the other areas of literacies from the pluriversal standpoint. I think you highlighted not just the looking into material as well as craft literacies, but also embodied experiences that we also have to consider, not only in terms of coming up with the technological, or you call it technocratic, solutions to the issues that have been forever with us, but still being reproduced to the issues that requires collective wisdom and different type of literacies as well, and not using the same old stories and ways of doing things and solving the issues that actually confront us as a society, global society, as a collective, as a humanity, and as well as other beings and non-beings in the world on our planet. Thank you. I would like to introduce now, to bring another speaker, the last speaker of our session, Sharifa, if you could unmute yourself. I don't see, to be honest, the speakers, all of them here. Sharifa, are you here?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, over to you, and let us know whether we will be showing your presentation as well, slides.
Yes, please. Mia, please help with the presentation.
It's on its way. It's on its way. I think Anna's going to
Thank you.
Sharifa, you are joining us today from another part of the world also, so it's welcome to you, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and the previous speakers, as well as our participants, for the engagement. I'm coming in, well, I'm lost, so much of what I would have been speaking about and from my area of expertise has already been spoken about, so I won't go into that. What I do want to share, though, is there's a video that I'd like us to listen to together and think about what is being said in this video. The gentleman we see there is a friend of mine. About 10 to 11 months ago, we had a conversation about issues related to literacy, ignorance, not knowing, and so on and so forth. And so please join me in watching. It's a very short one, it's 46 seconds, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Umbuli, ulibe degree. Umbuli we betigiri kuza kupita kuchanko iwe uli mbuli iwe kupita kuchanko iweyo koma uli mbuli iwe umbuli uli betigiri mayo ine umbuli iwe uli betigiri upita kusukulu koma kukhala mbuli sukulu kudamaliza koma kumachedwa mbuli.
Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed that one. The guitar playing isn't exactly big, but the words are what actually caught my attention. And what he brings to the fore is that he talks about illiteracy, ignorance, cluelessness. He talks about how these things, whether you have a degree or not, do not matter in issues and matters of illiteracy. What does this point to? It points to the multiplicity or pluriversality of the idea of knowing, the idea of what ignorance is, the idea of who actually is literate and who actually isn't. What does that mean? It means there are multiple ways of knowing, sense-making, of understanding the world, that our school systems are insufficient to, at the moment, to actually fill the gap that we actually need in order for us to survive, in order for us to live in the world that we are living in at the moment. So this is what this meaning, what I draw from this, the meaning of what our gentleman here is talking about. And so now I will move on to the next slide. Just bear with me. Yes, so what do we see here? These are peat latrines. I have gotten these images from the internet because at the time that I engaged and encountered this story, I did not take pictures, unfortunately. That was in 2016. So I will tell you a little bit of the story behind these peat latrines. So in 2016, we went into a community in the Lower Shiri, one of the villages, and a certain group village head. This is a village head is someone who looks after a collective of villages and a collective of village heads. And so in that community, we noticed that there were very well, nicely built peat latrines, like the one to the left. That one doesn't even look half as nice as the ones that we had witnessed were, and yet they were not being used. And now we had these toilets to the ones to the right. These ones are the ones that were being used. And some were building these toilets whilst they also had the other toilets existing and standing there. So we got very intrigued by that and asked, what is going on? You have already peat latrines here, you already have these toilets, but why are you not using them? And the answer was, well, these toilets are very dangerous, referring to the ones with the brick and iron sheets, because our ground here, our earth here shifts and moves and sometimes cracks. And so if that happens while you are in that toilet, you are in danger. You are not safe. Whilst in these other toilets that are made of straw or grass, whatever we call that, when the earth moves, because they're at the bottom there, they have big logs and then there's the straw there. The toilet simply, the thing simply just moves along with the moving of the earth. Now, what does this show? The toilets that are in iron sheets there were built by a certain developmental, non-governmental organization, and they were called by the community by the name of that organization. So what does this tell us? It tells us that there was a knowledge system, a way of sense-making, a way of understanding what is good for this particular community, and it's understandably so. That toilet to the left looks much more appealing and looks more hygienic, if I may put it that way, than the other one. But what this failed to do was to understand that the space in which this so-called development was coming into had a knowledge, they had a system, had an understanding and experiencing of the earth, of the ground, of the space that they lived in, that they did not take into consideration. Now, I have put these two here in order for us to, and I've put dialogue at the top, to ask that if this knowledge, system, awareness, or literacy, let's put it that way, that was being learned through the education systems, through the colleges, or wherever it was learned to build these toilets, had come into dialogue, into conversation with the one in the right, what might have come out of it? What kind of transformation might have come from that? And this, I have not put the imagined transformation because I would like us all to imagine if this and that had come into dialogue together and what that outcome might be. And so let's go to the next slide, please. When you ask what do futures look like through a pluriversal perspective, I would say the future looks dialogical. That these different pluriversal literacies, the multiple literacies that exist and that guide different people in the ways of knowing, sense making, and understanding the world and going about life in the world. If we just understand them as, oh, they are pluriversal literacies, and so each literacy is important. Without them dialoguing, we risk isolation. And in that isolation, we risk going right back to where we started, where one of the literacies emerges as dominant over the rest, which means we are back to square one, even after so many years. So I see a dialogical future within these universal literacies, them speaking to each other in order to make life better. Life, not just for us as human beings, animals, but also for the land, for the water, and so on and so forth. Because for our own survival, these literacies are important, as the previous speaker had spoken. And before I move on from there, there is a story about how, for me, as a child growing up in rural Malawi near the Shire River. Shire River is infested with crocodiles. And yet I went to school there and nobody told me how to survive these crocodiles or how to navigate my way around the water. Who told me? My grandmother, my friends, the people that I went to draw water with. They taught us how to read the water in order to know that there is a crocodile coming, because crocodiles don't swim above water, they swim under, and you can only see them while you're already in very big trouble, probably while your leg is already in the crocodile's mouth. And so what does it say? It speaks to the way our education system works from a universal perspective of what we need to know, forgetting the situated need for our survival, forgetting the situated literacies that we encounter in different scenarios. And what the next thing is, these futures, for me, from a pluriversal perspective, mean humanization. What does that mean? And Freire, who talks about education and dialogue in education as a two-way process, talks about when you do dialogue, you acknowledge the existence of the other as important. And so you create a humanizing effect to say, I see you, I acknowledge you. And through a pluriversal perspective, what that does, it acknowledges these other existing literacies as relevant, as useful, as helpful. And through that dialogue, it leads us to a transformative space, the same space that I talked about between the two toilets. What would come out of that? And so when multiple literacies come together, regardless of what literacies they are, indigenous, written, expressive, whatever it is that the literacies are, if they dialogue, they will come into a transformative space, creating something that is hybrid, that has been contributed to by the various literacies that were in dialogue. And now, what does that do? It gives us a functional and working system. Say the toilets that we saw earlier, the other one was not being used, and though it was beautiful, money had been spent in the developmental agenda, those pictures were sent to the funder, to the donor, to say, oh, here we have built toilets, but they were not being used. Yet the other ones were being used with locally made. If they had dialogue, they would have probably come up with something that was functional, strong, as well as very, very, very useful for both the communities, as well as something that the people who built them would be proud of. So that's functionality. The dialoguing, the humanizing, the transformative process leads us to a functional world whereby each and everyone's existence comes into play. And what does that do? It creates a sustainable space, because the dominance often leads, eventually it will lead to retaliation. And that does not give us a sustainable space. So there was a question around, and this is where my issue was going. So there's a question about human rights versus pluriversal literacies and so on and so forth, because human rights are positioned as universal. And I was just thinking about the case that has happened in Uganda recently and some African countries where there are anti-gay laws, which in an international space, in a globalized world, these are human rights related issues. So how do we navigate acknowledging and accepting a pluriversal way of sense making against a universal, because the universal exists? Do we start deconstructing the universal? Do we start adapting the universal? Or do we come from the specific and fit into what comes as universal? And there were questions here around who set this universality? Because in the world of pluriversal perspective, if there is no dialogue, this brings us back to the issue of dialoguing between literacies, between ways of perceiving, between ways of sense making, and so on and so forth. So I think for me, let me stop there in the interest of time, but the main thing to take away is that from the future, we look at pluriversal literacies through a space where there is dialogue between the multiple literacies, the pluriversal world, between different existences and ways of living, for the collective survival of us as people, of the animals, and of the land that we live in. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sharifa. I think you have done a wonderful job of putting everything together since the beginning of this webinar, and I don't want to repeat what you stated. And I guess earlier on, Dr. Carmen has also highlighted the, referring to Adichie's word, a danger of single story. You have highlighted also a danger of the definitions that we have, which has to be all the time reproduced. But it's important for us to have dialogue of multiple perspectives of literacy, and also deconstruct this notion of having standard solution for many other issues, whether it is in the learning systems or in the land and the development projects that we are carrying out around the world in our own villages and towns and cities we live in, and on the planet which we live in as human beings, but also animals and the land as well. Thank you so much for this wonderful story. I would like to highlight that one of the things which your friend through the music has expressed is that you may be literate going to school from the perspective of dominant conception of literacy, but you may stay illiterate of the land, of the environment, of the history, as well as other perspectives that are around you, surrounding you on this planet. Thank you so much for this wonderful speech as well. I would like to close this session with these impressive new insights that we are also exploring together with you as moderators of this webinar. And I would like to invite to the next part of our webinar. I would like to call back Mia as well as Jennifer to conclude this two sessions and also maybe identify some ways forward to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahat and Sharifa and all these amazing colleagues today. Jennifer, I'm just going to get my one slide while you...
Yeah, so just thank you, everyone. I was going to talk a little bit about plurality and literacies, but I actually think I'm so pleased that we had so many questions and people were so active. It has to be one of the most plural renderings of literacies that I've heard, and such a cross section. So I am going to move over to Mia and just thank all of the attendees for their thoughtful questions and all of the presenters.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I realize that we're at time, so I'm just going to say that this work is very difficult ahead, but not only does it take open-minded and innovative and excellent colleagues around the world in literacies and education, but it's of course an interdisciplinary or a transdisciplinary provocation to education globally. And that's why amongst us, we are designers, we are literacy scholars, we are geographers, we are artists, excuse me, and various different scientists. So this is our new Pluriversal hub of the Sustainable Futures Network, and we invite you to get in touch to take on this challenging work with us. And excuse me, and thank you all very much for your time today. It does take a collective effort, but we believe that education is the space, a fundamental space where this reframe of literacies education needs to happen. And education is possibly one of the hardest systems globally to shift. And therefore, that's our work ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Well, this is actually, we came to the end of the webinar, unfortunately, but thank you so much for all the speakers of this webinar. And we were joined by wonderful researchers, scholars, community activists, organizers, as well as educators from Latin America, North America, Europe, Africa, Asia Pacific. Thank you so much for wonderful perspectives in terms of challenging our conceptions, dominant conceptions of literacy, which actually oftentimes refers to being able to read and write in a very simple words or languages, print version only, but also bringing to our understanding, to our to us, the criticality of looking at it from the pluriversal standpoint, but also being in dialogical relation with different types, multiple types of literacies as well. Thank you so much. And UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning is very proud to host this webinar together with you. And I'm sure that for the future, we'll be engaging with more research, practice, and understanding of this concept of pluriversal literacies for more sustainable, for more equitable world for all of us. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mia and Jennifer, for bringing together all of us to this webinar. And thank you, all of you who participated in the webinar from around the world. And we will be responding to the questions even after this webinar is closed. And I'm sure Mia and Jennifer and other speakers of today will be happy to be in touch as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.